welcome to the Liverpool Community Podcast. I'm your host, Chantelle Lynch, and I'm joined here by a celebrity in the house, I must say, because I've always wanted to meet this woman for some time and everything. And it was really funny how she described herself as the Scouts powerhouse. So here I'm welcoming you to help me to welcome Chantelle Lunt. How you doing, Chantelle?
Hey Chase, I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Look at that. You're not scary. There's all these kind of things that are attached to us, aren't they? Oh, you don't want to be her, And I said, yes, I do. You actually formed or helped form the Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality, didn't you?
Yeah, that was something we founded around a year after we founded the Merseyside BLM Alliance, and it's our community organisation which is all around education and grassroots community work in the anti-racist space.
Like diversity and inclusion and stuff like that.
Yeah, and kind of demystifying and getting people to think about not only our history but what we're doing at the moment in terms of inclusion and making space for black and brown people.
Yeah, obviously, but also too is this started like around 2021.
Yeah.
Like in the midst of the pandemic, would you say?
Yeah, I don't know if we were on the first, second or third lockdown. It's all a blur. The 2020s for me are all a blur.
Yeah.
Like I don't know one year from the other anymore.
Nah.
But essentially the Merseyside BLM Alliance was what we set up when George Floyd was murdered, and that was the local BLM for Merseyside, and that was a lot of protest, a lot of education work, but we were very much in a reactionary firefighting space of dealing with, the racism that we were all feeling and seeing in society, and doing a lot of high-vis campaign work. And for us, in order to systemically dismantle institutional racism particularly, we wanted an organisation that was more in line with our long-term educational grassroots outlook. And so we set up Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality, which is a community interest company. And the idea is that while we still do campaign as BLM, and BLM is still there as an organisation that does grassroots on the ground campaign and protest work, that is the reactive space that we organise and do activism in, whereas Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality is the proactive space.
It's like the one that goes into schools and
Yeah.
and does more educational kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
the BLM is more like grab your microphone and let's get out on the streets.
Yeah.
And like the thing about it is like you were even saying is that, which was an interesting statement, where you were saying that, like if George Floyd hadn't happened, at that point in time when we were in the midst of this, pandemic-y kind of space, it might have been ignored, which I thought was an interesting kind of like thought pattern, because I could see what you mean is we've had so many black deaths, where we recognize the names, we talk about it for a minute, then we move on, don't we? But George Floyd stuck around for a long period of time because it was right in the midst, it was right in the cusp of the pandemic, which is strange because people are supposed to stay indoors. But like with the Americans, especially now, I don't think that you don't know what BLM is, people, but let's just say Black Lives Matter. But we've had marches that went across 50 states in the United States and everything. Like how big do you think BLM was here during that time?
I think BLM was huge in the UK, especially in terms of looking at protests that have been civil rights protests and anti-racist protests. Historically, these have been massively led and attended by people who are directly affected by racism. But what BLM 2020, as the latest wave of BLM and the civil rights movements did, was it brought our allies with us. So it wasn't just black people standing up, it was whole communities, white people, people from other communities, other movements and other groups joined us. So the numbers were huge, and we know like globally it was the largest civil rights movement in history. It was the largest wave of the civil rights movement. So as we kind of discussed earlier, it woke people up. But as you say, Black lives only stay, they barely even stay for a whole news cycle when we are brutalised by the police and when our lives are lost. Some don't even make the news. The thing that made George Floyd different was very much time, place and space, and the fact that his murder occurred at a time when everyone was at home. A lot of people had nowhere else to look, and they were forced to kind of be confronted with the brutality of a racist system that our people have known about for generations or more.
Now the thing about it is that you also said that like some people like wanted to compare the police state, like say between the U.S. and the U.K. by saying like, oh well, the U.K. is better, of course, but you also spent some time as a police officer.
Yeah,
Talk about
so
that a little bit.
yeah, I used to be a police officer back in 2017 till the end of 2018. And when I was in the police force, my eyes were opened to the institutional racism and institutional misogyny within the force. And it was the reason I left the force after quite a short stay. But also the reason that when BLM happened in 2020, and a lot of people were trying to be quite dismissive of the conversation being related to the UK police force. They were like, oh no, that's an issue in America. I was very strong and adamant that no, this is an issue in the UK, as many black people were, and this is something that we need to be discussing. And I would say that over the past 3 years, one of the biggest changes in discourse and one of the biggest cultural shifts that has happened in the UK is that it is now widely accepted, even among the white community, that the police in this country are institutionally racist. This is like, this is 1990s when McPherson was saying it. This is almost 30 years later. We're now at a place where we're like, the police force are institutionally racist. Even if they won't admit it themselves, public mood has shifted. The public now have a lot less trust in the police than they did, especially women. It's widely admitted and acknowledged that the police are institutionally misogynistic too. But to get that conversation in the mainstream media has been a huge effort, which is, it's been a lot of hours on the street, a lot of being in spaces, and pushing this conversation forward. So back when I started with BLM, these conversations were things that we could only have on the street or in our own communities. Now, being invited onto Good Morning Britain, and it's widely acknowledged that it's okay to talk about institutional police racism. That might seem like a really small thing, but it's not. It's a huge shift. To get the media to not only acknowledge but to report on this is a huge shift, and hopefully that shift is going to lead to the policy changes that we need within policing.
I mean, one of the statistics that you brought up was that like we have the second highest stop and searches compared to the Met and stuff, and like and I thought what was interesting was because we had an incident here in Liverpool with a man with the police in Liverpool one being held down, leading upon to his death. And you said that there was a term that was attached to this kind of approach that the police was making called excited delirium. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Mzee Mohammed was the young black man who lost his life in 2016, shortly after being restrained by the police. And, he was having arguably a mental health crisis and needed support. He didn't need to be handcuffed, he didn't need to be restrained, he needed medical attention. But what the police often dismiss incidents like this as, rather than basically being held accountable for their actions in terms of restraints, is there's a term called excited delirium, which is a medical term to explain people who have massive, public incidents where they display what the police describe as disproportionate strength, and then they're running around, and then they basically use that to explain why they die shortly afterwards. They usually put it down to cardiac arrest. I don't know what they put it down specifically in relation to Mzee, but when I was in the force, that was the term I heard being used to
Well, I mean,
explain
if
a lot
your
of these
knee is in my
incidents.
back and, my chest is on my stomach and, I mean, I might go into cardiac arrest.
And as a fairy, it's widely contested and it's widely problematic that the police often point to this to explain a lot of the people who often end up dying in police custody who are disproportionately black. So I do think, we've had a few cases where the police have been found to, their restraints have been found to directly account to the death of a black person. But even in those incidents, the officers involved haven't been sacked and they've been given training packages.
Yeah, but also too is that I wouldn't usually like bring this up, but I mean obviously because you spend time on a police force and facing these behind the scene issues. I'm interested into your thoughts around the Tyree case because a lot of times these are white officers doing things to black men, and it becomes a race issue. But is it a blue issue? Because is there something in the training or whatever that the police are getting? Because those were four black police officers plus one, who attacked Tyree, who was just on his way home and everything. You know about the Tyree incident.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with the Tyree Nichols case and watched a bit of the video, which is absolutely heartbreaking. But there's a few
Terrifying.
things that are interesting about that case. The first one being that it was around 5 black officers plus
Mm-hmm.
2 white officers. The 5 black officers' images were released fairly quickly. They were sacked fairly quickly, as they should have been, and faced criminal charge.
Yeah. There was none of that whole. We got to think
Yeah,
about this for a second.
they moved really quickly. They
Yeah.
didn't release the white officers' names till a while later, even though one of the white officers had tasered Tyree,
All
and those
right.
officers weren't sacked as quickly.
Didn't they
But
just show up after the fact, though?
no, one of them tasered him. There was an officer who
Oh, I did
tasered
not
him. It
know
was
that.
exactly so that wasn't as prevalent in the media.
Even the police chief didn't say that though when he
This came
was.
out a short while later. It was
Oh,
circulated by the media, but there was a few days in between in which it had basically been framed as it was, a group of black officers. But that doesn't excuse what the black officers did. And one of the things that I often campaign around and I dispute with the police, with police think tanks, is recruiting more black officers into the force is not going to solve institutional police racism. Because even if we look at George Floyd, when Derek Chauvin was kneeling on George Floyd's
there
neck,
was still a Chinese
there were
officer.
2 officers of colour who just stood with the back turned to it. They didn't want to see it. And when I was in the force, I was someone who raised issues of institutional police racism and what the police were doing, which was as clear as day to see. And I was very much told, A, by being bullied and intimidated by other officers, but B, by the behaviour of senior officers, that we know about it, but we just don't want you to talk about it. We need you to turn a blind eye. And one of my moment when I left was looking in the mirror and thinking, can I be an officer who turns a blind eye to what's going
Yeah.
on? The answer was no. And when I saw what happened to George Floyd, I saw essentially internalised racism, and what officers have to do to fit in the force is internalise that structure of racism. So sending more black officers in essentially just runs the risk of a lot of officers who look like us internalising the racist culture of the force, which overrides any other individual identity that people have. You assume a police identity, and that identity is one for which one of the cornerstones is institutional racism. So recruiting more black officers isn't the solution. Fixing the culture first is the solution. And there's a lot of people, I've been on like LBC and had conversations with a lot of people who will say quite often when we interact with black officers, it's like they've got something to prove to the white officers, so they treat us worse than the white officers do.
Yeah.
And so for me, that not only says, A, stop recruiting black officers, so I will never endorse at this time a call to recruit more black officers because that's not going to fix the issues.
Right.
At best, it's going to put people within the force who've got no power to counteract. They're not on an even footing with other officers to counteract the racist culture.
Oh, that's
At
true.
worst, they're going to internalise the racism and be worse than some of the white officers. So it's not a win-win situation for black people.
No. No, I mean, it's an interesting perspective onto that and everything. And obviously, when you don't watch the news every day, things change and, things are, coming out to light. Let's get to your origin story for a minute there, Chantelle, because, like, obviously, a woman with your values in activism, had to be raised by a strong black woman herself. So, just tell me a little bit about your origin.
I love that you say origin story. It makes me sound like a superhero. I love a good
Wow.
origin story. So yeah, so for me, I grew up in a bit of an unconventional way. So grew up in care from the age of 2, and I was raised in a predominantly white area, but in an amazing household which was full of black women, and it was led by my mum. So she was called my mum because she was my mum, Joan Edison, who fostered loads of young people, especially black young people, throughout her career. And she was just incredible. I've never met anyone like me mum, and that's not me just being biased. Like, everyone remembers me mum and says she was just such an incredible person, so fierce, and just so incredible at like protecting the young people who she looked after, but also, you know, living in an area like Halewood, which was predominantly white and Knowsley, working class white Knowsley, as a black woman from the 70s when she lived there right through to the early noughties when we moved out, and just holding that space. But not only holding that space, she was like a pillar of the community. She worked with young people who didn't even, you know, our door wasn't just open to foster kids. Like, we had everyone in from the whole
Yeah,
area. She had
I
street
like that.
parties. She was the pillar of the community, but she
Yeah.
maintained her integrity. She didn't compromise her black identity. This chain around my neck somewhere, the Africa chain, is hers, and she wore it with pride when it was a time when, you know, a lot of people felt the need in that area to hide their
Ah,
heritage.
I
She
see.
wore
Yeah.
her heritage with pride, and she was a proud black woman who didn't compromise any bit of her identity, and told us never to compromise our identity. And something she didn't sugarcoat. That's the thing. Like, she didn't try and protect us from the world. She told us what the world was like. Like, I remember the first time I got called the M word. I was walking to school with my sister. I was about 7, and this girl stood there calling us the M word, M word, M word. And I didn't fully know what the word meant, but my sister was upset. And when I got home, I was like, Mum, what's that girl saying? And she told me about what it meant and why she was saying it to us. And I was like, and we lived in a circular road, so I could walk that way past the girl on the right, but I could go the other way and still get to school. And I was like, I'm not going to walk that way anymore. I'm going to walk the other way. And my mum was like, no matter what way you walk, babe, you will face racism. You will hear those words. People will still do that. So you can walk that way and try and hide from it, or you can walk past it and hold your head up high, look her in the eye every day and show her that what she's saying isn't even going to touch you. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
Learned how to just hold my head up high and hold my own. And I think, yeah, she did it.
Well, you also said that you were forced to fight for your existence.
Yeah,
What does
yeah.
that mean?
So I think as a young person growing up in foster care, there's something called careism, which is,
Terrorism.
yeah, it's an interesting theory around how people who grow up in care are treated, because so they're often perceived as being a little bit like how black children are treated, as being older than their years, as being hardened by the things that they've experienced. And so because people perceive us as being a little bit tougher, they sometimes don't treat you as a child, or they treat you as something to be feared, like they don't want you to play with the other kids, or they think that you're going to take people down the wrong path. And so there's often a lot of hostility towards kids who grow up in care just by being kids who grow up in care. So for me, I had to really affirm my identity and had to really believe in myself, and also push back at a very young age towards people who were being hostile to me or not making space or dismissing me, and sort of really fight and define who I was from a really early age. And I think, you know, some of that has stuck somewhere
Yeah.
along the line.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, so basically back to the present, it's like, and some of the adversity that you had to face by being so outspoken. You were talking about how the far right, will come at you from time to time, as well as you will face like, uh, um, well, I wouldn't say you would face like cops coming after you, but you're aware of what they call like troll accounts or something like that. Would you like to speak a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
There's a lot of well, the far right just tend to target me on Twitter. They target me in various spaces because they don't like what I say, and that's increased massively in relation to the recent attacks at the hotel, the Suites Hotel in Kirby. But the police troll account has been something which has been ongoing for quite a while, and these are thinly veiled accounts by people who are either police officers or affiliated to police officers. There's a number of academics looking into these accounts, including Dr. Rebecca Tidy. And essentially, whenever I speak out about the police or say something that, you know, is negative about the police, I tend to get Twitter pylons where officers will, or thinly veiled officer accounts, alleged officers, will troll me online, will try to delegitimize me. I've had some of these accounts say things like that I'm the next Sasha Johnson. And for those who don't know, Sasha Johnson was an activist who I used to campaign with, who was shot in the head a couple of years ago. And just sending a lot of love out to Sasha, who's still recovering from that. And so they tend to target you and also do thinly veiled threats or actually mock some of my experiences. So some of the things I experience are quite well known in the media, and they will mock what happened to me, but quite often prove what I'm saying about them, that they are racist and misogynistic in the way that they troll me. And a lot of people will be like, well, what are you doing? So there's a few of these accounts are being investigated in tribunals and hearings, and I know a few of the tweets that have been sent about me are out there. But yeah, so it's an ongoing issue. I think if you're a woman especially who is in a campaign space, who is in a media space, who is outspoken as I am, then you will always be targeted by people who want to silence you.
Yeah. No, definitely. And like, so basically, I was asking you, like, well, what do you got coming up, in the space, and everything? And you were talking about you receiving another round of funding and everything.
Yeah, so Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality has just got its second round of funding for a project that we worked on for the whole of last year, which is around improving and increasing diversity and inclusion in movement, sport and physical activity. So encouraging local professionals, organisations to engage Black and global majority communities, but not just as service users. Like it's great and it will improve health outcomes to get them into spaces and to encourage them to use movement, sport and physical activity spaces, but at an organisational level, get Black trainers in, have Black and global majority members of staff, look at your boards, look at your coaching teams, really look at where we are not being represented locally. So we're going to be moving on to the next phase of that, which is creating a network to do just that, and creating a network of Black and global majority people working in the movement, sport and physical activity space, where we can have that network of support, like even people in our own team. I'm a cycle ride leader. Josiah, who's part of the team leading on this, he's just become a American football coach. I hope I've got that right, but he's really into sport too. And so it's something that we're quite passionate about, and we're really excited to be starting work on that.
So do you just deal with it around sports? I mean, do you not deal with the mind, like the education? Like we had a conversation around like Black studies and the importance of Black excellence. Do you not deal with that kind of stuff?
So yeah, with the movement, sports and physical activity training we actually start off with decolonising the history of sport. So looking at things like how the British Empire Games played into the way that Black people access sport. So the British Empire Games are now the Commonwealth Games, and that was all around people.
What about Jesse Owens?
Go on.
Go on. You know who knows Jesse Owens is?
No.
First Black track runner in the Olympics.
Okay, amazing.
And stuff. It was all the way back in the 1930s, wasn't it, Phil?
1936 in Munich, I think it was.
Thank you, Phil.
So yeah, we
I love this guy.
we talk about some of the inequalities. So for instance, Len Johnson, who was one of the best boxers out there from Manchester, who was denied his biggest boxing belt, one of the British boxing belts, because of a law that Winston Churchill had brought in, which said that to win a boxing belt you had to be born to two white parents. So we challenged notions that Britain didn't have segregations by looking at the colour bar and looking at legislation that was blatantly racist within sport, and also how we have a lot of, we like to demonise migrants, but look at our football teams, look at our sports clubs, they are massively made up of people who are migrants, well-paid migrants, but migrants nonetheless, and sort of demystifying some of that. But also looking at, even at an elite level, while we have a lot of representation in sport and spheres, once we stop judging people based solely on their ability and we look at a management level, we look at a referee level, we look at a coaching level, that diversity drops massively. So really scrutinising that. and scrutinising kind of the elitist narrative, which can sometimes stop people from engaging black and brown communities at a local level, just at a sport and for pleasure, at a hobbies level. So that's what we really want to increase.
Well, you're also working with young people, like 20 Stories High, doing something on resistance and local history, right?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. So big shout out to 20 Stories High and the team. They're
Shout out.
amazing. Also a shout out to Mersey Sports Partnership for the stuff that we just discussed then. But yeah, the 20 Stories High stuff has been brilliant. Essentially, I wrote part of a play a few years ago, which was about my experiences in the police and how black people are treated by the police. And Keith Starhar, who's the director of 20 Stories, or one of the directors, approached me and said that he wanted to do a creative response for the experiences of young people in relation to stop and search. So for the year before it went out, I was helping to develop that. And then as part of the tour, it is a tour of the Northwest in theatres, community centres and schools. I was the pastoral lead, looking after young people's wellbeing, but then I followed on from the tour. And although the play finished this week, I'm still doing the workshops in schools and community centres, and the workshops essentially teach young people their rights around stop and search, their rights around the law and the laws that they're most likely to interact with, and also teach them about the history of black resistance movements locally and the history of uprisings, why those have happened, what the relationship with black people and the police has been like, and why it remains a fraught relationship because of the actions of the police, and then teaching them about the creative side of activism and how to be involved. So it's been really enjoyable. I've loved being a part of this project. It's been brilliant.
Oh no, it sounds great. It sounds great. My son's actually involved in that, so I mean, look forward to seeing that. Now, I left out some early on, it's only because it's so full of information and everything here. But like today that we actually are shooting this podcast, you're on the front page of The Voice
Yes.
and everything, her hair is not magenta, it's blue.
Yeah, me and me
Yeah,
blue
I mean-
hair are on the front page of The Voice. Do you know what? I didn't even know about that. I broke my phone and was locked out of my social media. And then when I went back on my phone, someone had tagged me saying, "Oh, Chantelle's on the front page of The Voice." So The Voice, the latest March issue of the newspaper. So it's like one of the biggest black newspapers in the UK. It's celebrating its 40 years. It's done a piece about black women, and I'm one of the black women. I'm somewhere in there, so I'm gonna try and find a copy today and read about it. But it's talking about my campaign work, so it was really lovely to
Well,
see
you seem
myself
to
on the
find
front.
the digital copy online, so it's like you either can find the actual physical copy
Yeah,
or the digital
I
one.
feel like I want to hold it.
Yeah.
I feel like I want to see it. Like, yeah.
I would want to too, so I understand. But also too is that I'm interested in hearing about you met one of the local legends of New York, our man, Reverend Al Sharpton, and a panel. Where was this at? It was in London, I think. But what was it for?
Yeah, so the Black Equity Organisation, who we work with as M.A.R.E, we're one of their stakeholders and do some work with them. They invited me to London to be on a panel. And then just like, I was reading the email and just like dead casually at the end, they were like, "Oh, it's with the Rev Al Sharpton." And I was like, "What? What? The Rev?" So it was a lovely event in Hackney. Was it in Hackney? It was in Hackney. And it was essentially a passing
Al
over.
Sharpton in Hackney.
I know.
What?
I know. It was a passing of the baton to the next generation of activists. So I was
nice.
there with Lee Jasper, who's a UK activist, and he was like giving advice to me. And then Al came on, and there were a few other young activists from London. And he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And he gave advice about creating movements where we're supporting each other and the need to support black women. And he was just so inspiring. And then he gave me a few little bits of advice about just kind of managing when you've, come up and you don't really have anyone showing you the way and stuff. And it was lovely. So took his advice on board, starting to create some networks of black activists who are supporting each other so it doesn't feel as isolating. But it was really lovely to see him and to just kind of be in a space with such a giant who was giving us all these tips and sort of offering us support and taking the movement forward.
I mean, that's amazing. It must have been a lot of people in the room as well.
Do you know what? not. It was like an invitation only thing. So I think it was maybe 60 people in the room. So it was quite an intimate day.
Maybe 60 people. I don't know. A lot of people. Come on. Maybe 60 people? Sounds like a lot. Before we go, though, it's like, I'm curious as to, like, one of the first things you said was about how we need to make change within the public sector. And I just wanted to know what was your thoughts on that and how we can go about doing that.
So, in my opinion, BLM and BLM is a wave of the civil rights movement that is built on the work of everyone who's come before us and all the work of the incredible work that continues. But the Black civil rights movement in the UK, while it's absolutely amped up in the last few years and has grown in visibility, if we look at a policy level, we haven't actually achieved a lot of the things that we need to. So the statistics for Black mothers in relation to being 2 times more likely to die in labour, 3 times more likely to have stillbirths, those statistics remain. They haven't moved for the past 3 years. Inquest have released a report a few weeks ago saying that Black people who are restrained by the police are 7 times more likely to die. We know that the outcomes for young Black people in school in relation to exclusions are still relatively high. So it feels like we've achieved a lot of visibility, and in a lot of the private sector there seems to have been, from my opinion, a lot of movement. So there's loads of initiatives to get Black people in academia. There's a lot of space being made for Black people in creative spaces, and there seems to have been a lot of movement within the private sector to heed the lessons of BLM and make those changes or move towards making those changes. But within the public sector, we don't seem to have gotten that movement, and I do believe that's because of who we've got leading the country and the determination from those in power and those in government to ignore what BLM has been saying and not implement any of the changes that we need, if anything, to legislate against grassroots organisation, against protest through the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act. And so we really need to keep our eye on policy to keep these conversations happening in public spaces and to get the public sector to make the changes and to make the movements that we need to benefit Black people, because a lot of our lived experiences relate directly to the public sector, whether it be housing, whether it be education, whether it be the criminal justice system and employment. And that's where we need to continue to campaign to have the policy change that means that all Black and brown people can thrive in this country.
Deep. And I mean, all I can really say to all of that is we need that Black curriculum to be happening, because, I just think people need to know about the history. They need to know what's important, where they come from. They need to know how important they are and how important the people that came before them were. But I would just like to thank you, Chantelle, for coming to join me here on Liverpool Community Podcast. Sharing a bit of your history, a bit of your activism, and stuff like that. Remember, also too, these are Chantelle's experiences, and that we are privy to hearing them and everything and stuff like that. So that's how we will take a look upon it and everything. And but thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you, Chase. It was great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Love it how her voice went high on that one. And anyway, so I'm Chase Johnson. This is the Liverpool Community Podcast. And for now, we out of here.